Okay, I'd also like to have a look at how we might do an independent samples t-test. Now we can't do that on the pre and the post because these are definitely paired across, so we've got one person doing both of these. But we could have a look at some of the other data, and here we've got a column of the difference. So this is how much the stress has dropped while doing the course. So this particular person started at 28, dropped to 16, so that was a difference of 12. So we're going to have a look at this difference, and we might see if the effectiveness of the course depended on one of these other variables, and I thought we could look at the journal variable because there's only the 2 levels in there. I can't tell from here exactly what this variable means, and so we're going to have to go back to the dataset description to find out what journal means. I assume it means something along the lines of whether or not they journaled their meditations or something like that. So if we go to the website where the data came from, and there's a link to this on the learning materials page, you can see that there is the Excel file and there's also a README doc. Quite often if you see anything that says README, it's a good idea to actually read it. So I've already downloaded that and we'll have a look at it here. And what it's got is all the questions, so you can see exactly what the answers mean. Now, this I think is the one we're interested in. During week 2, have you been filling in your event awareness journal? And the answers are yes and no. So our question of interest would be, is there any difference in the effectiveness of the mindfulness training depending on whether or not they filled out the journal? And we could have a look at that first with a picture. So if we go into the data again, and we do another one of these charts. Now this time we need to do it a little bit differently because we don't have the data in the 2 columns. We've got one column of the differences, so we put that into the y-axis, and then we want to split it up by whether or not they did their journaling in week 2. So that means we get journal and we put that into the x-axis, which defines our group. So the thing to remember here is depending on whether or not your observations are paired or independent, you might do your graphs in a slightly different way as well as the test. So if we do this graph, now we can see that I should have put labels in. Is the one that they did it or the one that they didn't? One they did the journaling. So from here, the mean for those that journaled is slightly higher than the mean for those that didn't journal. But the confidence intervals have a huge amount of overlap, and I'm not convinced that the actual true change in stress is in any way dependent on whether or not they journaled. I don't believe that that result will be significant. Now you might be wondering what's this third one here with the 88. Now I suspect that's a missing data code, and we're just going to ignore the missing data for now. So in order to do this test, because we've got 2 separate groups now, we've got the group that journaled and the group that didn't journal, we're not doing the paired test, we're doing the independent samples test. So if we go to Analyze, Compare Means, Independent Samples t-test, so I've already put these in, I'll take them out again. So we're looking at the difference in the pre and post stress, so this is the amount that their stress dropped by, and we're interested in whether they journaled. Now this define groups means we need to put in these group numbers here, 1 and 2. Now if you had been very diligent and gone through and put your labels in yes and no, you could still use the numbers 1 and 2 for defining your groups. So we're only interested in group 1 and group 2, we're not interested in this missing data of 88. Continue. Okay. Now, our total does not equal 100 anymore, and that's because some people didn't write down whether or not they journaled, so we don't really know what they did. So for those that did journal, they had a mean drop in perceived stress of 9.8, and for those who did not do the journaling exercise, there were only 39 in that group, they had a mean drop in perceived stress of 8.4. So 8.4 is clearly not as high as 9.8, but our hypothesis is about the population. So if we had a population of people doing this, does this sample give us evidence for whether or not there would be a difference in the population? Now, there's a whole lot of numbers here about doing the test, and there's actually 2 different versions of the test depending on whether the variances are equal. And you would have seen this in the textbook chapter, that one of the assumptions of a lot of tests is that the variances are equal. I'm not going to look at this too much. Happy to provide extra readings for anyone that wants to go into it. You can see that the results tend to be similar. In either case, our significance is about 0.3. And this tells us that we have got no evidence against the null hypothesis. And so therefore we've got no reason to believe that the journaling actually was having any kind of effect on their drop in stress levels. Now, if you want to, you could go through and look at some of these other variables that they've collected. So far, you'll only be able to look at 2 groups together because we haven't covered any techniques to look at more than 2 groups, but you could have a look at meals. I don't know what that is. So and then you'll have to go back and find out what meals means. Oh, eating mindfully during the week. So you could see if there's a difference between the people that ate mindfully and those that did not.